Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Waqas Malik, your host and a forgiveness coach. Today we have the privilege of engaging with Barbara, an inspiring forgiveness specialist and evolutionary transformational facilitator. We will explore her journey and insights in the world of forgiveness and personal transformation. Thanks for your time, Barbara.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you. I'm also really curious about your journey too.
You are welcome. So my question is to you that your work as a forgiveness specialist and evolutionary transformational facilitator is intriguing. Could you share your personal journey and what inspired you to pursue these paths?
Well, I've always been really fascinated by personal and spiritual development. And ever since really I was about 15 years old and somebody gave me the book Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And I just wanted to ask the deeper questions of life, like why are we here and how can we face the challenges of life? And then I just read a lot of books, and then I came across a program called the More to Life program, which still runs today. And it was a personal and spiritual development training, and I loved what I learned there. And some of what I learned about forgiveness goes right back to that original training, which was 30 years ago. So it's been a long time of me traveling with being fascinated by personal and spiritual development. And then I trained to be a mentor with that particular organization and to teach some of their courses. And then I kept going on my path and kept learning about other things, including Buddhism and Sufism and, and other spiritual paths. And then I really became involved more with evolutionary spirituality, and just really have continued to be fascinated by all sides of personal and spiritual development, but in particular the forgiveness part, because I had the privilege of working on a retreat for 7 years, and we would be helping people to go through a detox. So they would be doing juice fasting and doing very deep emotional work. And I was fascinated by the forgiveness part, why some people found it really hard to forgive and other people found it a bit easier, and what it took for us as the therapists on the retreat to help people to with their forgiveness. And that was really the beginning of my utter fascination with the subject of forgiveness and focusing in on it. And then that ended up with me writing my book, Forgiveness Made Easy. And since then, talking about it with anyone who'll listen, about how forgiveness can be understood in a way that makes it a really amazing mental and emotional health practice. So even if you don't have any kind of spiritual leanings at all, I do believe it is a master spiritual practice if you do have a spiritual practice. But if you don't, it's a secular ethics practice, and it's something that's essential for our mental, emotional, and relational well-being.
That's interesting. Forgiveness Made Easy is a book you authored. What motivated you to write this book, and what are the key principles or insights readers can gain from it?
Well, my whole intention with that book was to make it easier. I couldn't really call it Forgiveness Made Easier. That's actually the truth of it, is because I don't think forgiveness is ever easy. But what I outline in the book is the five major obstacles. So what gets in our way? So I just tell you what they are. So for example, not really knowing what forgiveness means, because we think we have an idea, we think we know, we're afraid it means some things like letting people off the hook, or taking the weaker side, or not standing up, or not pursuing justice. And forgiveness doesn't mean any of those things. Forgiveness is about what you're wanting to hold in your heart. And so the way I actually use K. Bradford Brown's definition, that came from my original training. And he says that forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. And I'll say it again because it's quite long. So forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. And I sort of describe it a bit like this, where you're gathering up all the kind of the injustices that people have done. And, it's like, this is your kind of your pile of resentment or grievances that we carry in our hearts. And I was really reflecting today, because we were going to have this conversation, that I think that forgiveness is the way that we unburden our hearts. Like resentment is like when it hardens, when it crusts over. And forgiveness, the absolute refusal to hold on to the ill will, looks like this. So you really get that it's a choice, and it's a powerful choice to not hold on. and and that sort of leads us into the other obstacles, because one of the things we really don't want is, we don't want to feel vulnerable. We don't want to feel like our hearts are exposed. And I really do believe that resentment is kind of our preference to grief. It's like we resent things because we don't know how to grieve them. So it feels better if I've got this kind of hard kind of crusting over of my heart, than to leave my heart open and vulnerable and then feel the pain and feel the grief. And I believe that we choose resentment because we don't know how to grieve. And it's really important that we, although the resentment looks like kind of anger and fierceness, it's, like when you're standing on all of this, it's like you're standing on a whole pile of rubble. You're not on solid ground, you're on shaky ground. And the only way through really is to do what it takes to be able to let go. And it's such a powerful thing to be able to do. And so vulnerability is in there. And then the other obstacles are, our ego gets in there, because we want the moral high ground. We want things to be just. If someone does something, we want to make it even. And we even have that phrase, I want to get even. So we're trying to balance things up. So that's in there. And then also we play games sometimes. So we use resentment as a justification for things. We can justify being unkind to the other person, or sometimes we use it as a reason for avoiding, like having a difficult conversation or actually leaving a relationship. So we use our resentment in ways that mostly we're not conscious of. And I describe it a bit like an iceberg, and we're only aware of the top part of the behavior, just this little bit, and then there's all this stuff going on underneath, out of screen, that's actually driving everything. And that's the kind of material that we need to bring up to the surface so that it can be healed. And and although I am a massive advocate for forgiveness, I never insist that someone forgives. It's when you feel like this is not a good deal, you really do not want to be doing this for the rest of your life, that you then start engaging with your forgiveness as a practice. You decide, I don't want to hold this anymore. Most of the time we're not really aware we're holding it. We kind of keep it out of sight of other people, but it's in there. And that's why I teach about forgiveness as a practice, as something that we do and that we can revisit if necessary, and that we continue to do. And then so that's kind of like the ego and the resentment, and like not realizing what it costs us to hold those things, because the downside of all of this stuff in my heart is it ruins my intimacy, my peace of mind. And there's lots of studies that you're probably aware of, that about where forgiveness actually can change your blood pressure. It can reduce your cortisol levels. There's actually proven studies that show that it helps your health, your overall physical health. Because if you imagine that, like I was talking about the heart, it's like a contraction of the heart, because we can't bear it. Whatever it is that's happened, the injury is so painful that we contract, but then we're holding that contraction and then wondering why we can hardly breathe and nothing's really working and my life's not flowing, because I'm not moving, because I'm resenting and holding on. And so the relief of being able to forgive means that it is the healing of the heart. And sometimes you need to understand things with your mind, because we're always making meaning. We make things up about other people and the circumstances, and we don't necessarily know what the other person was thinking when they did that thing. So there is some material that needs to happen, the conversation between the head and the heart. But I really believe that forgiveness is the work of the heart. And it's like meditation is for the mind, or mindfulness. That's what forgiveness is for the heart. It's freedom, equanimity, presence in the heart. And then the last obstacle really is not knowing how. And I'd love to hear from you what your particular method is, because I'm always curious about what works. And I have created a 7-step process that I take people through individually, one to one, but also I work with groups as well and take everybody through the same at the same time, on Zoom. So that works really well. But having a way of doing it, because that's the other thing, we're so unconscious about what's actually going on in our hearts that we don't, unless you have a way. I mean, obviously you can be in therapy, that works as a kind of a way towards forgiveness. But my belief is that having some kind of forgiveness ritual, a process, a practice that you can do is really, really helpful.
That's amazing. Your work involves teaching and coaching individuals and teams in leadership, forgiveness, emotional intelligence, and spiritual intelligence skills. Can you elaborate on how these skills contribute to personal growth and transformation?
Yes, so actually at the moment I'm just getting ready to teach a course which is, I call them everyday inner superpowers. So they're 5 practices, so 5 transformational practices that we can use to support our mental and emotional health, because we don't really get very much training, as children, maybe more now, but in my generation, nothing about your emotions or how to deal with your mind. And although there's practices now, and you can get things like CBT through your GP if you need it, so we're more aware of our mental health. But also, even the fact that we call it mental health, to me it's just like, but what about art? It's like it's heart work, and we need to be able to distinguish the difference between our minds and our hearts, what's thinking, what's feeling. And just even those practices, so the 5 things that I'm going to cover, the 5 transformative practices in my course, are going to be: meditate, manage your mind, feel fully, forgive, and be grateful. And this is like, so some of it's about clearing out, like getting rid of the detritus that's in our minds and in our bodies and in our hearts. And then some of it is having a bigger picture, because I believe that having a meditation practice can help to develop, I mean, literally, I mean, you probably know this too, that you can develop the prefrontal cortex. You actually grow gray matter if you practice meditation, and that helps you. That's the part of the brain that helps us to have more equanimity, more perspective. And so it's like, if you are able to have that kind of big context, then you can become aware of what's going on in the mind, what's underneath, the level of the water in the iceberg. You can bring that material up into a safe container. You can do the work of the heart, which is also to do with, forgiveness and fully feeling, because often our feelings are quite limited. If like on the paper guide on your printer, it's like you can't cut off just one side. It's like it works together. So if you're cutting off, all of these negative feelings, then the sublime feelings, and you can't access those either. And the point really of having this different tools is that when difficult times happen, somebody, is really unkind to you, or you get a really challenging set of circumstances in your life, being able to have a way of approaching them can be really helpful. Is this something, am I telling myself the truth about this, or am I, aggrandizing or making meaning that's not true? Being able to pan for gold, being able to discern what the truth is of something, can be really helpful. And especially if you're a leader in business, to be able to clarify what exactly is going on here, and to be able to untangle your personal kind of like personality that gets hooked into things away from the actual situation. And these practices help you to become, normally we're like Velcro, so we get hooked on things. A colleague we don't like, or a family member we get hooked on when they do that thing. And so these practices help you become more like Teflon, so things slide off, that that they don't hook in the same way. Or if they do hook in, you have a way of unhooking. You have a way of letting go of those things and working through them. So it really is like like mental, emotional, and spiritual skill set. And some of it just takes us turning our attention towards it and away from everyday life, and just really tuning in, what's going on inside of me, and what needs to happen next.
Right. Leading beyond ego is a significant aspect of your work. What does it mean to lead beyond ego, and how can individuals develop this capacity in their personal and professional lives?
Well, it's very much the same. So what you're trying to do is diminish the impact of the your egoic presence. You know, like what it is that you are insisting life should be, and you know your attachment to things being a particular way, and having a much more zen, or you know having much more equanimity, because you're reaching beyond what your normal automatic reactive patterns are into what's beyond that, you know, what else is possible. And I really feel this is important, especially right now where we are in the world with all the multiple crises that we have, that we need to discover what else is possible, you know, like when we get through healing our early trauma beyond the, you know, what's in it for me, into how can I be of service, how can the particular skills and you know proclivities that I have, how can they be made available and of service to everybody else. And it doesn't mean that you don't also get served, of course you do, you know, because this is also about having healthy self-care and healthy self-love. But it's not just like, it's not just all about you. It's the American philosopher Ken Wilber talks about us each waking up, so that's to our true nature, growing up to our potential in all the different lines and levels and states and stages, then cleaning up, so everything that we need to do, like internally but also externally, pollution and what's going on in the world, and then opening up, which is, I believe, the work of the heart, opening up to more capacity. You know, how can I be more in alignment with the greater good as far as I can understand it, and then to show up to in the full capacity, but with kind of without your ego as much as possible. And the funny thing about ego is you know, I kind of like refer to it in my book as one of the things that gets in the way of forgiveness. But we also need to have a healthy sense of self, so that we know what's okay with us and what's not, and where are our boundaries. So it's not like surrendering all of that, but it's more about identifying, as opposed to I'm Barbara J. Hunt, I'm identifying as part of one consciousness that you and I share, and that whoever's listening to this is sharing, and that all human beings share. And that really does make a big difference, because then we go beyond our differences, our perceived differences, you know, nationally or you know culturally or ethnically. You know, like we learn that there's one consciousness and there's one life, and that we then become in service to that.
Right, amazing. You mentioned your goal to inspire and co-create global peace 2.0. What is the vision behind this concept, and how do forgiveness and transformational facilitation contribute to achieving it?
Well, it's funny. I mean, you could call me naive to believe this, but this is the theory. Okay, is and I base this on Einstein's theory of relativity. So E equals mc squared. So I was using the same kind of like formula. So global peace equals peace or forgiveness in every heart times 7 billion or 8 billion, whatever we are now. Because I truly believe that if we start individually doing the work in the heart about forgiving and pledging our hearts to peace, that will change something. And it may take a long time, it may be way beyond my lifetime, it may be a slow way of doing it, but I don't see that the people who are in positions of power are interested in creating peace, because that's not what we're creating. We're just creating war after war after war, and it seems to be escalating, as opposed to really deciding, okay, so we have differences, how do we resolve those differences, how do we come together and resolve those differences, how do we make it fair, how do we get past our, you know, our individual egoic or cultural, you know, resistance to that. And so my belief is that if I choose to pledge my heart to peace, then that makes me one among 8 billion who are going to say, I am going to refuse to hate anyone for any reason, because I don't have to. Whatever they do, whatever happens to me, and I'm not going to like asking for a tragedy or terrible things to happen, but I'm going to choose to let go of my ill will, because I can. You know, it's because I'm in charge of what I keep in my heart. And so I'm going to do my very best to try and take the other person's perspective, or to be understanding, or to have equanimity. I might also ask for justice if something really terrible happens, and this is all my resentment about it. There may be something I might need to take somebody to court, because forgiveness isn't about not keeping clear boundaries. It's not about letting people off the hook. It's not about litigating if you need to, or taking strong action. But it's just, I don't have to hate someone in order to be able to do that. We need laws. We need ecocide laws. We need laws that say, actually, all war is a barbaric. We have to find a different solution for humanity. As a humanity, we say, no more war. War is not acceptable way of settling our differences. We have to find a different way, and we have to work towards decommissioning all the means that makes war our usual option. How do we de-escalate violence? How do we help people to be more understanding of differences? And so it starts in your heart. And on the day of remembrance, on the 12th, well, it's actually the Sunday, Remembrance Sunday, where we're remembering the soldiers and the victims, everybody, I think, who has suffered through war and is continuing to suffer through war. I'm hosting an online forgiveness field where people can come and do their practice and just choose one thing that you need to forgive, one person or one thing. And then you're pledging your heart to peace. You're saying, I'm not going to hold that ill will in my heart any longer. I'm going to make my heart a place of peace. And so that was really what inspired me, was, like, it's almost like an underground kind of like bottom up, like the mycelium floor, like all these little people who deciding, I'm going to be a peace, I'm going to be like an advocate for peace, a peace warrior, or whatever you want to call it, like that's my choice as a human being. So that's what I'm trying to do, like by doing podcasts like this one, to inspire people to think about forgiveness as a practice, and about dedicating your heart to peace. Because you can. I mean, obviously you don't have to, but you could.
That's amazing. So you use an integral approach, strategic intervention, EFT, and various tools and techniques in your coaching. Can you provide an example of how these methods have helped a client resolve their past and create a more inspiring future?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because it's interior, subtle work. Often what happens with the clients is they say, "Oh, you know what? I just don't get reactive in the same way." Like, normally I would have this kind of horrible feeling between me and my boss, or a family member, and that dynamic has changed because they've done their work. And often the comment that I get most often when people do one-to-one work with me afterwards is that they feel lighter. They feel like the old, like, again, underneath the iceberg, the old patterns that are down here, that are running old behaviors, that they can be addressed and they can be healed. And it's not just the forgiveness part. It's also being able to liberate and discover where those patterns were put in place, often in our early years, and being able to, using NLP to let go of those. And I also use Ken Wilber's 3-2-1 shadow process, where you're describing, sometimes we're working in metaphor, which can be very powerful. So somebody might work like with a volcano that's representing anger, for example, and then we'll dialogue with it and discover, what's it representing and where was it put in place. And through that process, again, it's a very safe way to face the inner material, the shadow material that is just getting in our way. Because what I'm really interested in is that, like, once we've resolved the past and we become fully present, it's like, well, what could, if we weren't so busy with all of our wars and differences, what could humanity create together? We could create heaven on earth, so let's do that. So my work is, it's not really just about healing trauma and releasing the past. It's doing that so that we can do something else.
Right. So your work spans coaching clients internationally. Could you share some notable success stories where your coaching has led to deep and meaningful change for individuals or teams?
Yeah, I mean, and again, just like as I was saying, some of it is, it's changing the fundamental way that you relate to things. And I've worked with people through divorces so that they're able to maintain a loving relationship with their ex. So that can be a really powerful thing. And then also people, like who just working in charities or other coaching clients, where it's whatever it is that's stuck is usually childhood material. So although it might show up in a work context, I remember one woman, when we went into the dynamic between her and her boss, it actually ended up being a reflection of her relationship with her mother. And so we did healing work on the relationship with the mother and then the boss. So, it's like, so sometimes the doorway is now. So whatever it is that you're presenting that feels like is unresolved material, is like life nudges you into, like, in this moment saying, oh, actually, there's still something back there that needs a bit of help. So, yeah.
Right. In your experience, what are some common challenges people face when it comes to forgiveness, and what advice would you give to those who may find forgiveness a difficult or complex process?
Well, I don't think anybody finds it easy. I really don't. I don't find it easy. But I choose to have it as a practice. And when you say something is a practice, it means that you're using it, on a sort of semi-regular basis, and you're getting better at it. I think probably if you're really struggling with forgiveness, some of it is if it's too close up, if the thing that has just recently happened is really in your face, you need to wait until you can get a bit more perspective on it. I have a friend at the moment who's going through a very difficult divorce. And I know that there's no point in bringing up the idea of forgiveness. She knows what I do, but there's no point in having a conversation with her about that because she's too much in the full feeling at the moment. And as far as I understand the neuroscience, if you're really ragingly angry, the parts of your brain that you need to bring online to help you forgive aren't even accessible because the feeling, the anger and the rage is too strong. And and I think there is something about, when we've got this sort of sense of protection, that maybe there has to be time for you to hold the resentment until you feel like enough time has gone by that you're starting to think, I don't want to keep carrying this. Like I'm it's like it's getting in the way. I can't, my heart's shut. I'm contracted. I don't want it anymore. And that's the time that you then get in touch and we do some forgiveness work, because I do believe that there is a kind of timing to it. The way I teach it is that you can do a really powerful forgiveness ritual in 90 minutes. It's like, that is amazing, but you may have had to wait 20 years or 40 years before you get to that 90 minutes. And that sometimes is how it happens. And there are stories about people who forgive like the most awful atrocities, and sometimes they do it like instantly, like someone's child is killed in a shooting in America, or whatever it is, some terrible tragedy, and then they are instantly able to, like some family members able to instantly forgive, especially if they have a particular faith. Other family members cannot understand why they would want to do that and just want revenge and retribution and justice. And so everybody's different. And I really do believe that's why I keep going back to the fact that forgiveness and grief are sisters. Like it's really what we need to be doing is grieving, and in that grieving is our forgiveness. That is our like letting ourselves feel the pain is, and that's what dissolves the anger. And so I believe that if you you need to forgive somebody, because I always keep a forgiveness list and have done for years, and I put things on it, every now and then, a family member, I'm just like, oh God, I can just hear myself bitching about that, or that's really annoying me now, so I'll put them on my forgiveness list. I'll do my work, and then, like I said, once I've released all of this in the privacy of my own forgiveness practice, I might then have a conversation with them about that thing. But it's just a lot easier, rather than presenting somebody with all the kind of like the stuff that they don't want to hear. No one wants to sit through you telling them the full extent of your resentment. They just want to know, what's the problem, and how can I be different? How can I help to fix it? And so if people are struggling with their forgiveness, it's usually because either it's too soon, or it's then they're not aware that the resentment is serving them. Like we're holding on, and I don't want to let it go, but I'm not aware there's definitely disadvantages to holding the resentment. And in fact, there's a lovely Brené Brown quote where she says of resentment, she says it goes down like milkshake, goes down like a milkshake, but it burns your insides like a battery acid. So that kind of shows the two sides. You think you're getting something out of it, but actually the detriment is to you. And then, so if we don't know, if it's too soon, or we don't know why we're holding on to it, and we don't know what the disadvantages are, and we don't know how, like that's why we're struggling with our forgiveness practice. And so knowing how to do it, and people have different ways of doing their forgiveness practice, and I just have the way I've done it, and I've seen works with literally thousands of clients over the years. But it doesn't mean that that's the only way. If you have another way that works, then obviously do that. But they're the places where we can get stuck, and also in our meaning making. Because if we think that it's like letting the other person off the hook, or like they're going to get away with it, then that can stop us from doing our forgiveness work. But the truth is, you can still pursue justice with a free heart.
Right. In conclusion, Barbara's journey and work as a forgiveness specialist and evolutionary transformational facilitator shed light on the profound impact forgiveness and personal transformation can have on our lives. As she reminds us, forgiveness is a powerful tool for personal growth and ultimately the collective pursuit of a more peaceful and harmonious world. Thank you, Barbara, for sharing your insight and wisdom.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for listening. Yeah.